He came walking from Bedford into Cambridge one May morning when the sun was still young and the dew scarce gone from the grass. His worldly possessions he carried on his back in an old knapsack. His short jerkin was stained and torn, and there were holes in his long hose. On his square head, and drawn over his brow, he wore a frayed cap, set jauntily, with a heron's feather pointing skywards. He carried a quarter-staff, and stepped outright manfully, scanning the flat fenland from beneath his thick brows, his young mouth dogged, his sombre eyes coldly calculating. Of years he numbered 14, but his shoulders had a breadth beyond his age, and his thighs a thickness of muscle that gave him the appearance of a grown man dwarfed. Nor was the face below the clubbed fair hair that of a child, for in the low brow lay strength, and about the straight mouth purpose. There was little boyishness in his eyes, but a frowning look, and at the back, lurking in the green-blue depths, a watchful gleam that was never absent. One spoke to him on the road, a pedlar tramping south, and gave him good day. He answered in a crisp, deep voice and smiled, showing a row of strong white teeth. "Whither goest thou, Junker?" the pedlar asked him idly. "To my goal, fellow," Simon retorted, and passed on. The pedlar called after him for his haughtiness, but he paid no heed. He was never one to waste words. So, at length, he came to Montlis, which was his goal, and stood for a moment before the drawbridge, surveying the rugged castle. A man-at-arms lounged on the bridge, hailed him good-naturedly. "What want ye, boy? This is the lion's den." The glimmer of a smile came to light the darkness of Simon's eyes. "I seek the lion," he said, and walked forward across the bridge. The man laughed at him, barring his passage. "Ho ho, ye seek the lion, eh? He would make but one mouthful of you, my fine sprig." Simon looked up into his face, jutting brows lowering, eyes agleam. "I seek my lord the Earl," he said. "Out of my way, sirrah." At that the man clapped his hands to his sides, shaken with Herculean laughter. Having recovered somewhat, he achieved a clumsy bow. "My lord is from home," he said, mocking Simon. "You lie," Simon answered quickly. "My lord will know how to punish a lying servant. Let me pass." He awaited no permission, but slipped by, eel-like, and was gone across the bridge in a flash. Out of sight he paused, not hesitating, but seeming to debate within himself. He looked thoughtfully at the great gateway, standing wide with soldiers lounging there, and his lips tightened. He went swiftly through, light-footed and sure, and attracted but little notice. One of the men stopped his task to shout a surprised question after him, and Simon answered briefly over his shoulder. "On my lord's business," the man laughed, thinking him some scullion's child, and turned back to his companion. Simon went on up the winding slope to the castle door, and was there met by a group of men-at-arms who denied him ingress. "To the scullion's entrance, babe," one told him, and the muscles about his mouth stood out in anger. He kept his ground, not a whit afraid. "I must see my lord," he answered, and only that. "Wherefore, Pop?" the man asked him, and when he would not answer, sought to hustle him roughly away. But Simon wriggled from under his hands, and springing to one side, brought his heavy quarterstaff down athwart the man's shoulders with so much force that, great man though he was, the soldier staggered. Matters there would have gone ill with Simon, but for the appearance of a boy, a little younger than himself, who came strolling towards them, followed by 2 liver-coloured hounds. He was dark and magnificently clad, and he carried himself with an air of languid arrogance. "Holla there," he called, and the soldiers fell away from Simon, leaving him to stand alone, arms folded and head turned to survey the newcomer. The boy came up gracefully, looking at Simon with a questioning lift to his eyebrows. "What is this?" he asked. "Who are you to strike our men?" Simon stepped forward. "So please you, sir, I seek my lord the Earl." One of the men, he whom Simon had dealt that lusty blow, started to speak, but was hushed by an imperious gesture from the boy. He smiled at Simon with a mixture of friendliness and hauteur. "I am Alan of Montlis," he said. "What want you of my father?" Simon doffed his cap, showing his thick, straight hair, clubbed across his brow, and at the nape of his brown neck. He bowed awkwardly. "I want employment, sir," he replied. "These men deny me entrance." Alan of Montlis hesitated. "My father stands in no need," he began, then paused, fingering his dark curls. "There is that in you that I like," he said frankly. "Come within." Simon bowed again, but he gave no thanks, only standing aside for the young Montlis to pass through the doorway, and as Alan went by, he shot him an upward look, keen as steel, appraising him as it were. That was a trick which in after years had the effect of disconcerting his foes most mightily. Alan did not see the glance, but swept into the castle, whistling through his teeth. Across the great stone hall he led Simon to an archway, over which hung a leathern curtain, nail-studded. Before he pulled it back, he spoke again to Simon in a whisper. "Ye will speak to my lord fair," he cautioned. "He is not so douce." The flickering smile touched Simon's lips. "Fulk the lion," he said, "I know." "He is to be feared," Alan said, breathless. Simon looked scorn. "I fear no man." At that, Alan opened wide his brown eyes and giggled a little. "Ye do not know my lord," he said, and pulled the curtain aside. They entered a fair room carpeted with rushes and hung with all manner of paintings, biblical and historical. A table stood in the middle, and although it was now past 8 o'clock in the forenoon, the remains of my lord's breakfast still stood upon it. A chine of salt beef, a broken manchet, and a tankard of ale. In a great chair beside the table, leaning back at his ease, sat Fulk of Montlis, a giant of a man, deep-chested and magnificently proportioned, as fair as his sun was dark, with a crisp, golden beard, whose point came forward belligerently. One of his hands was tucked in the belt of his long gown, the other lay on the table, massive and hairy. Alan ran forward and fell to his knees. "Sir, here is a boy who would speak with thee." The lord's heavy, light-lashed eyelids lifted, and his small blue eyes travelled slowly from his son to Simon. "Shouldst know that I do not speak with every vagrant whelp who is presumptuous," he said, a rumbling note of annoyance in his voice. "Away with you, sirrah." Simon stepped up to the table, cup in hand. "I am no vagrant, good my lord, nor will I be so miscalled." Alan stayed on his knees, affrighted at such temerity, but my lord of Montlis laughed. "Good lack, what then are you, Springald?" "I hope one day to be a man, my lord, even as you," Simon answered. "That is my ambition, sir, and so I come to seek employment with you." Montlis flung back his head and laughed again. "For that you beard the lion in his den, eh? I will eat you for my dinner, cockerel." "So said they at the gate, my lord, but you will find me of more use alive than eaten." "Shall I so? And what canst do? Wind silks for women folk?" "That and other things, my lord," Simon answered coolly. So, what then? Tend my hounds? Or are they too strong for your management?" At that Simon curled his lip in disdain. "There does not live the beast I will not tame, my lord." My lord's eyes were now a twinkle. He clapped the table jovially. "By the rood, I like thy spirit, my young spring chicken. Canst take a buffet? Aye, and give one." My lord cast him a quizzical look. "As thou didst saw my man without." If he expected Simon to show discomfiture, he was disappointed, for Simon only nodded. My lord laughed. "Impudence, why camest thou to this great door? Know ye not the scullion's entrance at the back? I have never approached my goal through the back door, my lord, nor ever will. I march straight. It seems so indeed, said my lord. Well, what dost thou want of me? I would carry your lance, and squire you, sir. Montless snapped his fingers, jeering. Thou sit a horse, a flea on a camel. The thick brows drew closer together, and a little colour stole into Simon's cheeks. I shall grow, my lord. Nay, nay, art too small. What are thy years? 14, sir. A babe, forsooth. Get thee gone, babe. I've no need of squires. Simon stood still. Your page, then, till I am grown to your liking? God's my life, methinks thou art overbold, babe. I do not take peasants for my pages. I am no peasant. Ho ho, what then? As gentle as yourself, my lord. By Our Lady, what art called? Simon, my lord. Well, it's a name. What else? Simon lifted his shoulders, half impatiently. I call myself Beauvallet, sir. My lord pursed his full lips. It hath a ring, he nodded. What is thy real name, sir? I have none. Tush, your father's name. Simon did not answer for a moment, but at last he shrugged again and looked up. Geoffrey of Beauvallet, he answered. Holy Virgin, I should have known that face. Art Beauvallet's bastard, then? So my mother told me, my lord. Who is she? Does she live? She's dead these 4 years, sir. She was one Jehan of Beauvallet's household. That is nothing. Montless sank back again. Aye, aye, but what proof have you? A ring, my lord, little enough. Show me. Simon put his hands up to his neck and drew a ribbon from his breast from which hung a golden ring. Montless looked at it long and curiously. How came she by this? I never asked, my lord. It matters not to me whether I am Beauvallet's son or another's. I am what I choose to be. Here's a philosophy. Montless became aware of his son still kneeling and waved him to his feet. What thinkest thou, Alan? Here is one of the Beauvallet brood. Alan leaned carelessly against the table. Beauvallet is no friend of ours, sir, but I like this boy. He hath courage. Tell me, babe, where hast been since thy mother died? I had a home with her brother, sir, a woodcutter. Well, and then? I wearied of it, my lord, and I came here. Why not to thy father, Bantam? Simon jerked his shoulder again. Him I have seen, my lord. Montless rumbled forth a laugh. And liked not his locks? Well enough, sir, but you also had I seen, and of both of you I heard. God's body, do I so take thy fancy? Men call you the Lion, my lord, and think it harder to enter your service than that of Beauvallet. My lord puffed out his cheeks. Aye, so is it. Ye like the harder task, babe. Simon considered. It is more worth the doing, my lord, he replied. My lord looked over him. Art a strange lad. Having forced thy way into my stronghold, thou'lt not leave it. I will not. I am no easy master, Montless warned him. I would not serve any such. You think 'twere knighthood with me? Simon glanced up. What I become will be of my own making, sir. I ask no favours. Then I like thee the better for it. Shalt be page to my son till I find thee fitter occupation. And that to spite Beauvallet. Look you, art satisfied? Simon knelt. Aye, my lord, and I will serve you faithfully and well, that there shall be no gratitude to weigh me down. Montless smote him on the shoulder, delighted. Spoken like a sage, my little fish. Well, get thee gone. Alan, take him, and see to it that he is clothed and fed. And thus it was that Simon came to folk of Montless. From page to Alan, he became page to my lord himself, and was decked out in Montless red and gold. Very brave he looked in the short red tunic worked with gold, and caught in at the waist by a leathern belt. His hose were gold, his shoon red, and red was the cap. that sat afloat rakishly on his fair head. His duties were many and arduous, nor did my lord spare him any fatigue or exertion. He slept on a hard pallet across folk's threshold, rose early, and went late to bed. It was part of his duty to wait upon my lord and his lady at dinner, and every morning. At 10, Simon took his stand on the dais beside my lord's chair, attending to his wants, or standing immobile, the while my lord and his guests ate and drank their fill. He was at three people's beck and call, my lord, his lady, and young Alan, and he spent his time running from one to the other. He grew apace in height and breadth and strength until there were few who could throw him in a wrestling match. Few could shoot an arrow farther or more precisely, be it at butt, prick, or rover, and few who could stand beneath his mighty buffet. Yet for the most part he was gentle enough if stern, and it was only when his cold anger was aroused that the caged lion within him sprang to life and swept all before it, and when that happened there came that light to his eyes which could make the hardiest evildoer cringe and the most arrogant squire cry mercy, even before Simon's iron hands had touched him. Blows he received a many, whenever my lord chanced to be in an ill humour, which was often, but they never disturbed his cold composure, nor awakened any feeling of resentment in his breast. From folk he bore blows in an acquiescent mood that yet held no meekness nor humility, but woe betide the squire or serf who crossed his path, belligerently inclined. When he was still with Page, my lord's squire, Lancelot of the Black Isle, commended him loftily, and when Simon paid no heed to his orders, dealt him a buffet that should have felled him to the ground. Simon staggered under it but recovered, and gave back blows for blow with so much force behind his steel wrist that Lancelot, full 5 years his senior, went tumbling head over heels and was sore and bruised for days after. When folk heard the tale, he made Simon squire in Lancelot's room, and swore that there was more of himself in Simon than in his own son. But it was seldom that Simon fell foul of his peers. His very calmness of temper compelled respect, and for that he was every inch a man. Men liked him and were eager to call him friend. Friendship he never courted, caring nothing for man's opinion of himself, nor seemed he to have an ounce of affection in him, save it were for folk of Montless or Alan, whom he regarded with a mixture of contempt and liking. His father he saw many times, but it is doubtful whether Geoffrey of Beauvallet noticed him. Once indeed at Bedford, in the court of law, whither Simon had gone in folk's wake to settle a dispute over some land between Montless and Beauvallet, Geoffrey, glancing idly around, surprised an intent stare from his enemy's page, who sat with his chin in his hands, calmly and keenly scrutinising him. Geoffrey looked him over haughtily, but when his eyes met Simon's, he encountered that strangely disconcerting gleam. He turned his head away quickly, a tinge of colour in his cheeks. Simon continued to survey him, not from any wish to annoy, but simply because he was interested, and wished to see what manner of man was his sire. He was not ill pleased with what he saw, but neither was he enthusiastic. Geoffrey was a tall man and slim, fastidious in his dress and appointments, soft-spoken and proud, so said Montless, as Lucifer himself. His close-cropped hair was grizzled now, but his eyes were like Simon's in colour, and as deep-set. His eyebrows too were thick and straight, but his mouth was gentle and full-lipped, which Simon's was not, and his brow was not so rugged. He had one son, Geoffrey, who was just 2 years older than Simon, and who Simon had never seen. Between Alan and Simon, positions were very soon reversed. It was Alan who gave devoted love and obedience. Simon received but could return naught but a tolerant protection. They played together often, but in every sport Simon was an easy victor, save when the game was of a gentle kind. At bowls and cloche Alan could beat him, but when they played at balloon ball, Alan ruefully declared that he was no match for Simon, who played with his naked hand and struck the great leather ball with such deadly accuracy and strength that Alan was fain to dodge it instead of returning it. At archery he was even less skilled, and Simon watched his efforts to bend the ball with a contemptuous, rather amused air, which incensed the young Alan, so that he shot his arrow still more wide of the mark than ever. Simon tried to teach him the sport of a quarterstaff, and wielded his own staff moderately enough, in deference to Alan's tender years, but Alan, although he was not lacking in courage, disliked such rude and rough play, and would not engage with Simon. He liked to go out chasing or hawking, and he showed an aptitude for pretty and quick swordplay. Tourneys were not so much to his taste, and rather than enter into any of these pastimes, he would sit at home, strumming upon his harp and weaving fanciful songs to his many lady lovers. He would paint too, and make posies, for all the world like some troubadour of a century ago. With the ladies he was ever a favourite, and by the time he was 15 he was forever paying court to some dame or another, greatly to Simon's disgust. "Hast thou ever loved?" he asked Simon once, plaintively. They were sitting together in a room high up in one of the turrets, Alan playing his harp, and Simon fashioning a new string to his great bow. Simon did not raise his eyes from his task, but his lips curled disdainfully. "Oh, love, love, art forever prating of this love. What is it?" Alan played a soft chord or two, bending his handsome head a little to one side. His dark eyes glowed, and he smiled. "Dost thou not know? Is there no maid who stirs thy heart?" "I know of none," Simon answered shortly. Alan put his harp away and crossed his shapely legs. He was wearing a tunic of peacock blue velvet, with long sleeves lined with gold, that touched the ground. There was a jewel in his left ear, and a ring on his finger, while the belt that drew in his tunic at the waist was of wrought gold, studded with gems. He formed a striking contrast to Simon, who was clad in a long robe of crimson, with high boots on his feet, and no ornament on all his dress. He still wore his hair clubbed at neck and brow, although it was now customary to display a close-cropped head. He was 16 at the time, and already stood 6 foot in height, with mighty thews and sinews, a broad back down which the muscles rolled and rippled, and a pair of arms that were bear-like in their strength. Beside Alan's slim figure, he seemed a very giant. Alan watched him for a moment, still smiling. "My sisters are not so ill-looking," he remarked, a laugh in his eyes. "Elaine is perhaps more comely than Joan." "Is she?" Simon said, still intent on his task. "Which dost thou like best, Simon?" Alan asked softly. "I know not. I have never thought." He glanced up, a sudden smile flashing across his face. "Dost suggest that one of them should stir my heart?" "They do not. You feel not the smallest pulse-leap in their presence." Simon stretched his new string experimentally. "A pulse-leap?" he said slowly. "What folly! My pulse leaps when I have sent an arrow home, or when I have thrown my man, or when a hawk has swooped upon its prey." Alan sighed. "Simon, Simon, is there no softness in thee at all? Dost love no one?" "I tell thee, I know not what it is, this love. It stirs me not. I think it is nothing save the sick fancy of a maudlin youth." Alan laughed at that. "Thy tongue strings, Simon. If it might sting thee to more manly pastimes than this morning of love, 'twere to some purpose. But it will not. Love is all. One day thou'lt find that I speak sooth." "I wonder," Simon retorted. Again Alan sighed. "Simon, what hast thou in place of a heart? Is it a block of granite that you carry in your breast? Is no one anything to you? Am I nothing? Is my lord nothing? There is no love in you for either of us." Simon laid his bow down and began to polish an arrow. "Art like a whining babe, Alan," he rebuked his friend. "What shouldst thou be but my lord's, thou and Montless?" Alan stretched out his hands. "That is not what I would be to thee," he cried. "I give you love, and what dost thou give me in return? Hast a single spark of affection for me, Simon?" Simon selected another arrow and passed his hand over its broad feather almost lovingly. He looked thoughtfully at Alan, so that the boy sprang up, flushing. "Thou carest more for that arrow than me." "That is folly," Simon answered coolly. "How can I tell thee what my feelings are when I do not know myself?" "Couldst thou leave Maltlis today without one pang of regret?" demanded Alan. "Nay," said Simon, "but one day I shall. For the present I bide, for I want some years to full manhood, and I am happy here, if that is what thou wouldst know. Between thee and me is friendship, and between my Lord Fulk and me is understanding. A truce to this silly woman's talk." Alan sat down again, twanging his harp discordantly. "Thou art so strange, Simon, and so cold. I wonder why I do love thee." "Because thou art weak," Simon replied curtly, "and because thou takest delight in such fondlings." "Maybe," Alan shrugged. "Thou at least are not weak." "Nay," Simon said placidly, "I am not weak, neither am I strange. See if thou canst spend that bow, Alan." Alan glanced at it casually. "I know I cannot." "Shouldst practise then, thou wouldst please my lord." "Certes, I do not want to please him. I was not fashioned for these irksome sports. 'Tis thou who shouldst try to please him, for 'tis thou whom he loves." Simon balanced a broad feathered arrow on his forefinger. "Good lack, what has my lord to do with love? There is little enough of that in his heart." "So you think," retorted Alan. "I know that he watches thee fondly. Perchance he will knight thee soon." "I have done naught to deserve it," replied Simon shortly. "Nathless, he will do it, I think. He might even give thee one of my sisters in marriage, if thou didst wish it, Simon. I am not like to. There is no place for women in my life, and no liking for women in my breast." "Why, what will be thy life?" asked Alan. Then at last a gleam shone in Simon's eyes, cold yet eager. "My life will be," he paused, "what I choose to make it. And what is that?" "I will tell thee one day," Simon said, with a rare touch of humour. Then he gathered up his arrows and went away, treading heavily yet noiselessly, like some great animal. True it was that Fulk cared for him more than for his own son. The lion's spirit was not in Alan, and between him and his father was less and less understanding as the years passed. Fulk's jovial roughness, his energetic ways, his frequent lawsuits, wearied and disgusted Alan, and in the same way Alan's fastidious temper and more cultured tastes became the subject of Fulk's jeers and sighs. In place of his son, Fulk turned to Simon and took him wherever he went, sparing him no exertion nor hardship, but watching his squire's iron equanimity with an appreciative, almost admiring eye. Thus, bit by bit, grew up between the two an odd understanding and affection, never spoken of, but there at the root of their attitude towards each other. Fulk wanted not servility, nor maudlin love, and from Simon he got neither. Strength was the straight road to his heart, and fearlessness. Simon had both. They were not always at one, and sometimes a quarrel would crop up when neither would give way an inch. When Fulk stormed and raged like a wounded buffalo, and when Simon stood rock-like, unshaken by anything Fulk might do to him, icy anger in his strange eyes, inflexible obstinacy about his mouth, and his brows forming a straight line across his hawk nose. "What I have I hold," Fulk roared at him once, pointing to the device on his shield. "I have not, but still I hold," Simon retorted. Fulk's eyes showed red a moment, and a fleck of foam was seen on his pointing beard. "God swoons," he barked. "Am I to be braved by you, mongrel whelp? It will be the whip for you, or a dungeon cell." "And still I shall hold," Simon answered him, folding his arms across his great chest. "By death, I will tame you, wild cat," Fulk cried, and drew back his fist to strike. But even as he would have done so, he checked himself. and the red went out of his eyes. A grin came and a rumbling laugh. "I have not, but still I hold," he repeated. "Ha ha, I have not, but—" "Ha ha," chuckling, he smote Simon on the shoulder, a friendly blow, which would have crumpled an ordinary stripling to the ground. He became indulgent, even coaxing. "Come, lad, thou'lt do as I bid thee." Coaxing left Simon as unmoved as the late storm. He shook his fair head stubbornly. "Nay, I go my own road in this." The red light showed again. "Dare ye defy me?" roared Folk, and closed his huge hand on Simon's shoulder. "I can snap thy puny body as a reed." Simon shot him an upward rapier glance. "I dare all," he said. The grip on his shoulders tightened until little rivulets of pain ran down from across his chest. He did not so much as wince, but held Folk's look steadily. Slowly the grip relaxed. "Aye, ye dare," Folk said. "I am of a mind to break thee over my knee." "That is as it may be," Simon answered, "but still I shall hold." At that, Folk broke into a great laugh and released him. "Oh, go thine own road, cub, so ye do not take it into thy hot head to hold me." Simon looked him over, frowning. "That I think I cannot do," he said. "I am not sure." Whereat Folk laughed, and more liked him the better. When his 17th birthday came, Simon was already a man in build and cool sagacity. In face he has changed hardly at all, save that his forehead was more rugged, and thick brows jutting further over the deep-set eyes of green-blue, and that his mouth had lost its youthful curve, together with any softness that it might once have had. He smiled but rarely, nor ever laughed out as did my Lord of Montless. If he laughed, it was a short, dry sound, somewhat sardonic in tone, and quickly gone. But when he smiled, there were two ways he had of doing it. One when he was crossed, that one more terrible than his frown. The other when he was in smiling humour. A singularly sweet smile, this, with a hint of boyishness at the back of it. Folk knew him for a soldier born, and a leader of men. If a disturbance arose in the Earl's vast household, it was Simon who quenched it when the fussy, incompetent marshal had failed, and the steward threatened in vain. The guards, inactive and fractious, would quarrel amongst themselves, and heated by too much sack, come to blows and noisy, perilous fights. It needed but for Simon to come upon them with his soft tread and his cold composure to cause the brawlers to fall apart. Great men though they were, and stand sheepishly before him, answering his crisp, stern questions with a meekness they did not show to John the Marshal. Boy as he was, Simon could reduce the most drunken roisterer to a state of penitent humility. He had but to use that upward glance of his, and all insubordination was at an end. This he very soon discovered, and came to use the disconcerting look more than ever. There was something compelling in his appearance, an elusive air of rulership and haughtiness, and a suggestion of a hidden force that was invincible. Montless recognised this, as the Malvolane in him, and chuckled to himself, watching. He set Simon to rule his guards, and observed his ruthless methods with amusement. He would not throw the garment for his protection about his squire, wondering how he would maintain his position alone. Simon wanted no protection, and found no difficulty in maintaining his position. At first, when he interfered in some quarrel, he met with insolence and threatened blows that lasted for a very little time. Men found that insolence moved him to an icy anger that was to be dreaded, and if it came to blows there would be broken ribs or dislocated jaws for those whom Simon first struck. Therefore it swiftly ceased to come to blows. If it was a question of judgment or arbitration, men found Simon relentlessly, mercilessly just, but because of this justice, no complaints of him were carried to my Lord Folk. With all the harshness and cold demeanour, Simon was liked and trusted. The grumblers dwindled in number, for Simon had short shrift for any such. His code was a queer one, and men found his advice puzzling, But when they had slowly unravelled his line of thought, they found it good, and this because it was his own code. A guard met him once on the battlements and unfolded a tale of war. One of his companions had a spite against him and plagued away his life. On this day the man had slyly tripped him up with his spear, so that he was burning to be avenged. What would Simon do for him? "Naught," Simon answered curtly. "Fight thine own battle. Yet, sir, if I strike this man as he deserves, you will come upon us and have us shut up for brawling, or maybe whipped." "But ye will have struck him," Simon said, and walked on, leaving this man to think it over. Presently the man came to him again. "Sir, if I punish mine enemy, and there be something of a brawl, we shall both be punished by you?" Simon nodded indifferently. "But if I strike him hard enough, methinks he will not again plague me." "That is so," Simon said. "I think I will strike him," decided the man, and straightway went to do so. There was indeed something of a brawl, and as a consequence, Simon had them both under lock and key for 24 hours, but neither bore him any ill will, nor was there another complaint lodged on the matter. Simon knew his men, and his method of ruling was his own. Rude as were those men, and as rough, he was master, and not one of them thought to dispute the fact. Folk, watching from afar, smote his thigh and laughed triumphantly. "The boy is a man," he said, hugely delighted. And was there ever such another? At the time of Simon's 17th birthday, affairs in Wales and the north of England had reached something approaching a crisis. It was in the year 1403, when Bolingbroke had sat upon the throne for 4 years, and his son, Henry of Monmouth, had held the reins of government in Wales, unassisted, for some months only. Although he was but 16 years of age, the prince had already led a punitive expedition into North Wales, and considerably harried the rebel, Owain Glyndwrdwy. But now Percy, the redoubtable Hotspur, had with his father, the Earl of Northumberland, and his uncle, the Earl of Worcester, raised his standard in the north against the king, and was on the point of marching to join Glyndwrdwy in Wales. It was in July that these state affairs first affected Montless, although for some time past folk, ever ready for war, had chafed and fretted in his fair land, debating whether he should take his men to join the prince on the marches or no. His uncertainty rendered him irritable to all who crossed his path. Only Simon understood the reason of his irritability, and he gave no sign that he understood. But although he said little, he too was watching affairs, and under his habitual placidity was a glowing desire to be gone from quiet Montless to Shrewsbury, where lay the Prince of Wales with his insufficient army and his insufficient supplies. One rode hot haste through Cambridge early in the month, and came to Montless, covered in dust, dropping with fatigue upon a jaded horse, whose sides were flecked with foam, and whose slender legs trembled when at last he was checked before the bridge of the castle of Montless. "In the king's name," he cried to those who would have questioned him, and passed over the bridge and up the winding path to the castle at a stumbling trot. At the great door he was met by Simon, coming forth to target practice. "In the king's name," he said again, and slipped wearily to the ground. "My lord the Earl is within, young sir." "Aye," Simon beckoned to one of the guards who came to the tired horse's head. "Take your beast to the stables, William, and see to it that he is well cared for. Come within, sir." He led the king's messenger through the great central hall, where the scullions were clearing away the remains of dinner, to the room where he himself had first come to folk. The same leathern curtain hung across the doorway, and Simon pulled it back, stepping aside for the messenger to enter. "My lord," he said calmly, "one comes from the king." Then, seeing the man safely within, he let fall the curtain and went out again to his target practice. When at length he returned, he found the messenger departed and folk roaring for his squire. Even before he had set foot across the threshold of the castle, He could hear his lord bellowing his name from the hall. He went in unhurriedly and found that Falk was standing at the foot of the winding stairway, vainly calling him. Alan sat in a great chair by the empty fireplace, and Simon saw at once that he was perturbed and a little nervous. "You called, my lord?" Simon said, walking forward across the stone floor. Falk wheeled about. "So, thou art here, and where hast been, cub? I have shouted myself hoarse, thou hapless fool." Simon propped his bow up against the wall. "I have been shooting without, sir. What is your pleasure?" "Shooting without, forsooth," roared Falk. Then, of a sudden, his wrath died down. "Well, well, we shall have need of it, belike. Come thou hither, Simon lad." Simon came to the table, and Falk handed him a sheet of parchment. Simon read it through slowly, and while my lord puffed and blew and stamped his feet, for all the world like some curbed-in-battle horse. "Well," Simon said at last, "so we go to war?" He gave the king's writ back to Falk and frowned. "We can make ready in the space of 3 days," he added tranquilly. Falk laughed, stuffing the parchment into his belt. "Thou cold little fish! Is it nothing that the king has sent for me to join him at Shrewsbury?" "Nay, it is a great thing," answered Simon, "but I shall not be in a heat because of it. That is foolish." "Holy Virgin, why?" demanded Falk. "There will be more done, and that expeditiously, if a head is kept firm upon one's shoulders." "Wise boy!" Falk shook with laughter. But one would think thou hadst been in a dozen campaigns. Sit thee down, my Simon, that I may confer with thee. See our Alan there. The lad's in a ferment. Never fret, Alan, I'll not take thee along with me." Alan flushed at the taunt. "Indeed, sir, and that is my place. Dost say I shall not ride forth with thee?" he cried. "A pretty captain wouldst thou make," jeered Falk. "Paling at every sound, weary ere ever the day has begun, thou'lt stay with the women folk. 'Twill be more to thy taste, methinks." Up sprang Alan in a rage. "It is not to be borne," he cried. "I have as much courage as thou, and I say it is my right to go with thee." "And I say thou art a very babe," Falk replied. "It is Simon I will take." Then, as Alan looked as if he would fly at him, he spoke more gently, pleased at his son's fury. Nay, Alan, calm thyself. I did not mean to taunt thee. Art too young for a hard campaign, but shalt rule here in my stead. I tell thee," Falk brought his fist down on the table, so that the boards almost cracked beneath it. "Hold thy tongue. What I have said, I have said. Sit thee down again." Alan went sulkily to his chair and sank into it. Satisfied that he was silenced for the time, Falk turned to Simon. "Look you, Simon, there are 60 men-at-arms I can muster, and 80 archers under Francis of Daly. There is John the Marshal, and Vincent my captain. No puny force that, lad. And thou shalt ride with me and taste the joys of war. Does the prospect please thee?" "Very well," Simon said, with the glimmer of a smile. "Which way do we go?" For over an hour they discussed the various routes, until Alan began to yawn and fidget. "It is through Northampton and Warwick I will go," declared Falk obstinately. "And thereby waste time?" said Simon. "It is through Lutterworth and Tamworth or Lichfield we must go." "I say I will not. Who can tell in what state are the roads that way, foolish boy?" "The messenger came through Lichfield, sir," remarked Alan languidly. "He made no complaint." "Well, I will think on it," growled Falk. "Hotspur is marching towards Chester, so we must e'en take the speediest road." He heaved himself out of his chair. "And now to tell my lady," he said, and tugged ruefully at his beard, for my lady, gentle though she was the only being before whom Falk bent the knee of his headstrong obstinacy. He went heavily up the stairs now to her bower, leaving Alan and Simon alone. Alan bent down, fondling one of the hounds. "Thou hast the luck, Simon," he said. Thou dost not want to go, Simon answered. What are wars to thee? How can I tell when I have never taken part in one? Ye quibble, Simon said harshly. Wilt be happier here with thy lady loves? Alan said nothing for a while, still stroking his hound. At length he sat back in his chair. Needs must I win my spurs one day, he said. Why not now? Time enough, Simon replied. This will mean forced marches over rough ground. Thou wouldst be weary ere thou hadst come to Shrewsbury. Alan looked wistfully up at him. And thou who art but 1 year my senior, art made of iron. Hadst thou led the life I have led since my birth, thou also wouldst be of sterner stuff. Or dead, Alan said, smiling. Aye, perhaps. Where went the messenger from here? To Greyman, and from thence to the Baron of Shirley. He was at Beauvallet 2 days ago. The king calls for all his loyal servants. I wonder, shall we vanquish Percy? God willing, Simon answered. God willing indeed. Right must triumph. In that case, said Simon dryly, Hotspur like to win. Alan opened his eyes wide. Simon, the king! The king is the king! So too was Richard, Simon reminded him. Alan digested this. And so thou dost not believe that right must win? Not I, Simon laughed shortly. Might and generalship will win. What else? Alan hesitated. Simon, I fear me 'tis as Father Peter says, he remarked gravely. Simon cast him an inquiring glance. What says our worthy priest? That thou art thought godless in thy spirit. Simon laughed again, and this time the sardonic note sounded strongly. When said he this, Alan? Do I not attend mass? And go I not to confession? Aye, but sometimes thou dost say things. Father Peter spoke to my lord of you. Simon was smiling now, so that his eyes were almost slits. And what answered, my lord? Oh, my father said, Let be, Simon is very well. Aye, so I think. Let thy mind at rest, Alan. I am no heretic. Alan started up, shocked. Simon, I meant not that. Nor did Father Peter. What a heat over naught, Simon jeered. What if thou hadst meant it? Yet I do not think I look a Lollard. Oh, no, no, Alan cried, and wondered to hear Simon laugh again. 3 days later, Fulk left Mountless with his following, and started on the arduous march to Shrewsbury. And rough ground as much of it was they arrived at the town at the end of the week, 1 day before the king himself, who was hastening there to throw his army between the oncoming Hotspur and the prince. Some sprinkling of men Fulk lost on the march, but his casualties were few, so that he remarked with unwonted philosophy that if the weaklings would all fall out before they came to Shrewsbury, so much the better. Now that he was in action, his irritability left him, and he surprised Simon by his good humour, and his patience in cheering on his men. His joviality was infectious, and it was a light-spirited little army that halted before the gates of Shrewsbury at the end of that weary week. They were welcomed royally, and quartered well, and within an hour of their coming, the Prince of Wales sent to bid my lord wait on him at once. So Fulk sallied forth, accompanied only by his squire, and made all haste to Henry's court. It was there, while waiting for Fulk to emerge from his audience, that Simon first met his half-brother, Geoffrey of Beauvallet. Geoffrey had arrived not 24 hours before Mountless, leading his men in place of his father, who was sick at home. Simon recognised him at once from his likeness to Beauvallet. Geoffrey was sauntering through the great hall. He lounged past Simon, and, glancing casually over his shoulder to see who it was startled to find that he was the object of a directly piercing stare, cast upwards at him from under heavy brows. He paused on his way and returned that stare from his superior 2 inches in height. He was a handsome young man, some 19 years of age, dark as Simon was fair, but with the same projecting forehead and green-blue eyes. But where Simon's eyes were cold, Geoffrey's sparkled, and where Simon's mouth was hard, Geoffrey's had a softer curve of laughter. It curved now in unveiled amusement, and his eyes twinkled merrily. "What's to do, young cockalorum?" he asked. "Whence that haughty frown? My complexion likes you not, perchance?" Simon came forward, and as he came, Geoffrey saw the red and gold device on his surcoat. His smile faded, and he half shrugged his shoulders. "Ha, one of the Montless brood?" he said, and would have turned on his heel. "Nay," Simon said, "I thought I would as lief be that as aught else." Beauvallet paused and looked him over. "And what are you, Master Deep Voice?" "I think I am nobody, Sir Geoffrey." "Why, so do I," Beauvallet mocked him. "And being nobody, see ye cast me not another such glance as I surprised today, for it may be that I am hot of temper." Simon smiled then, not a whit angered. "It may also be that I am strong of arm," he said. "Well, see ye cross not my path again," Beauvallet answered. "I am not so puny, I give you warning." He strode on, leaving Simon to look after him with a curious glint in his eyes. Not unfriendly. Then Fulk came out in rare good spirits, and bore his squire back to their quarters, making him ride beside him, instead of a few paces behind. "By my troth, Simon," he said energetically, "that boy is a man, with all a man's brain and courage." Simon turned his head. "The prince, my lord?" "Aye, young Henry of Monmouth. He is 1 year thy junior, but by God, he is 3 years thy senior as well, and thou art no babe." Simon bent to pass his hand thoughtfully down his horse's neck. "What thinks he, sir? Can we hold against Hotspur?" Fulk shot him a sidelong glance, and pursed his small mouth. "Who shall say, Simon? It is said that Hotspur is 1,400 strong, and he hath Douglas with him, and Worcester, and Glyndordry. Like to join him here, we can engage. Word is brought that he is little over a day's march from here. We are a handful, and if help comes, not we can but hold the town. And while Glyndordry joins him, where lies the king this night? I know not. If he comes before Hotspur, all may be well, but—" "What manner of man is this Henry of Bolingbroke?" asked Simon. "Is he one to allow another to forestall him?" "Nay, by the rood, Henry is a man, even as his son." "Then I doubt not he will be with us before Percy," said Simon placidly. "Whate'er befall, it will be an interesting combat. It is like to be bloody enough to satisfy even the savage heart," Fulk grunted. He shifted a little in his saddle. "Beauvallet's here." "I know." "Hast seen him, then?" "'Tis not thy father, but his firstborn son. Thy father lies sick of a fever." "Doth he so?" "I have spoken with Geoffrey of Beauvallet, while you were with his highness." "Spoken with him?" Fulk turned to look at him. "What said he? Why didst thou accost him, pray?" "I did not. I but looked, and my look misliked him. Wherefore he gave me warning that I should not again cross his path." Fulk laughed. "That swift glance of thine, eh, Simon? So, Beauvallet called thee to book, and what dost thou think of him?" "He seems a man," Simon answered, and then relapsed into a silence, which was not broken until they came back to their lodging. A little after noon on the following day, Simon sallied forth from his quarters, and went afoot through the packed town towards the battlements. The streets were thronged with soldiers, both of high estate and low, so that Simon's progress was necessarily slow, but at length he came to the battlements on the east side of Shrewsbury, and entered into conversation with some of the men-at-arms stationed there. He was permitted presently to mount the battlements, and stood behind the parapet, looking out across the country. The breeze stirred his fair hair, and whipped his surcoat about his legs. He leaned his hands on the low wall, closely scanning the surrounding country. Thus he stood, motionless, until an officer came up to him. "Well, young sir, and what seest thou?" he asked, rather amused. "I do not know," Simon answered. "Presently I will tell you." The officer shaded his eyes from the sun, looking out from under his hand to where Simon gazed. "There is nought, Sir Sharp-eyes, no sign of life of Hotspur, or of our king. For the one God be praised, and for the other God pity us. Ye came with Montless?" "Aye." Still Simon stared at the distant horizon, his eyes narrowed and keen. The officer laughed at him. "Do you think to take my place in spying out the approach of men?" he inquired. "Mine eyes are sharper than most," Simon replied. "See yonder." He stretched out his arm, pointing to the southeast. The officer screwed up his face against the sun's rays, blinking rapidly. "What is it?" "I see nought." "Look more to the right. There, coming over the brow of the hill. Something moves. Do you see it not?" The man leaned forward, again shading his eyes. "Nought," he said uneasily. "Art sure, Sir Squire?" Simon's gaze did not waver. "Aye, I am sure. Something is coming over yonder hill, for I can see movement, and ever and anon there is a glistening, like a tiny star. That is the sun on armour." The officer turned to hail one of his men. "Godfrey, come hither. Ye have sharp eyes. What can you see yonder?" The archer stared at the faraway hills for a long time in silence. "A clump of trees, my captain," he ventured at last. "Nay, not that. Coming over the brow, more to the right." "I see nought, sir." "Ah! Well, what?" "Little enough, sir, or perhaps mine eyes deceive me. Methought I saw twinkling. There again!" Captain Lenoir turned again to Simon. "Mayhap ye are right, sir, but I'll sound no alarm till we see more plainly. If what ye see is indeed an army, it is 20 miles distant or more. If it is Hotspur we—" At last Simon turned. "Hotspur? What folly is this? Hotspur will come from the north, from Chester. What I see is the king's army." "It may be." Paul Lenoir looked out again, and in a moment gave a start. "I saw a flash! Yet another!" "You will see them more and more as the army comes over the hill," Simon remarked. Lenoir sat down upon the parapet. "I would give something for thine eyes, sir. May I not know thy name?" "I am called Paul of Lenoir. I am Simon of Beauvallet." He too sat down on the parapet, and for a long time they stayed thus, saying little, but ever watching the twinkling line that was slowly growing. And at last Paul of Lenoir rose and gave orders for the trumpeters to blare forth the great news that the king's army was approaching. Then Simon left him and went back to his lord's side. The town was of a sudden in a ferment, and streets more crowded than ever, some men cheering, others asking excited questions, others gloomily prophesying that it was Percy and not the king who had made a cunning detour in order to bewilder them. One and all rushed to the walls to verify the joyous tidings, and Simon's progress was even slower than it had been before. He came upon Fulk, who was conferring with his marshal, and would have passed him silently, had not Fulk called after him. "Ha, Simon, where hast been? Is the king indeed approaching?" Simon paused. "Aye, my lord, he is over 20 miles from here, but he brings a fair army, as I should judge." "Saw ye the approach, then?" "I have been with one Lenoir upon the battlements, and espied the army by the glittering of armour in the sun." "I dare swear thou wert the first to do so, my lynx-eyed Simon." "Aye, but one saw them not long after me. They will be at the gates soon after dusk, for they are marching swiftly." He proved to be right, for not long after sundown, an advance guard from the army galloped up to the gates to tell, officially, of the king's coming in full force. The gates were opened, and the young Prince of Wales rode out to stand there in readiness to receive his father. Henry came at last, and publicly embraced his son. Then he rode into the town beside him, while the excited inhabitants who lined the streets cheered till they were hoarse, flinging flowers before him, and scuffling amongst themselves to obtain a better view. Within an hour a council was summoned, from which Fulk did not return until well into the night. When Simon lay sleeping peacefully and dreamlessly upon his hard pallet, They had hardly risen next morning when my lord's page came flying in with news that Percy had appeared before the walls, and at sight of the royal banner withdrawn his men. Some fought to one place, some to another. Fulk summoned his squire to him, and made all haste to the court, which they found packed with the various captains and generals. The king held another council, and when Fulk at last rejoined Simon, his eyes were kindling with the lust for battle, and his mouth smiled grimly. "We are to march forth, God be thanked," he told Simon. "Glendordry is not come, so the king will pit his strength against Percy. Stafford is to lead the van, the king takes the right wing, and the prince the left. We are to go with the prince, Beauvallet also. Beauvallet is the prince's friend," he added. "I did not know. He's very like thee in face, Simon, save that he's dark. Do we enroll ourselves under the prince's standard?" "Aye, at once. Summon me John the Marshal and Vincent, lad, and see to it that thou bearest thyself in readiness within the hour. I will carry my great cross-hilted sword and the old lance." Simon nodded and went quickly away to carry out his orders. In an hour he was fully equipped, riding behind his lord, and after what seemed to be a marvellously short time, the army was marched out of the town, 14 to 1500 strong, north, to Hateley Hill, whereupon Hotspur had drawn up his army. "God's my life," muttered Fulk, "this is a pretty place for fighting." Simon surveyed the ground coolly, and frowned a little. Along the foot of the hill were a number of ponds, and in front of them grew thick rows of peas. Behind these obstructions were the rebels ensconced. There was a long, long wait, during which the horses stamped and fidgeted restlessly, and the men murmured amongst themselves. Then from the royal lines went forth a herald to treat with Percy. Another wait followed, and the herald returned, accompanied by a man clad all in armour and mounted on a fine horse, with his squire behind him. "Worcester," said Fulk. "Are we to treat, then?" No one had an answer for him, and he sat silent, waiting. To Simon it seemed hours before the Earl returned to the rebel lines, and after that was still another long pause. Evidently Hotspur refused to accept the terms laid before him, for there was a stir in the enemy's lines, and word came down the king's army that the king was about to give the order to advance banner. It was now long past noon, and from the impatient, chafing men came something of a cheer and cries of "St. George for England! St. George! St. George!" Fulk settled himself more firmly in his saddle, curbing his horse's sidling movements. "Is thy blood fired, Simon?" he asked, smiling from beneath his helmet. Simon's eyes looked out, cool and watchful as ever. "Aye," he said shortly. "Does Stafford charge?" Fulk nodded. "God help him, yes. I mislike the look of yon army, Simon. Hotspur is no novice in battle, but there is some talk of a prophecy concerning him that says he will fall today. Keep at my back as far as thou art able, and do not lose thy head. Hey, we are moving, and so are they." After that there was no time for conversation. Through the hampering growth of peas charged the van, led by Stafford, and to meet him came Hotspur, thundering down the hill, with spears levelled, and from either wing the archers shooting. Suddenly the air seemed thick with flying arrows, and alive with cries and the clash of arms. Among the ponds and beyond them the vans of the two armies engaged, and for a while nothing could be seen save a medley of soldiers fighting together in a growing disorder. A shout went up from Hotspur's lines, and one cried from beside Simon, "Stafford is down, and they are through." An order ran down the prince's flank, and in a moment they were in action, galloping forward to charge the enemy's right wing. In a minute they seemed to be in the midst of a storm of flying arrows. One whistled past Simon's head, but he only laughed and spurred on, trampling peas underfoot and hacking through. A cry came to his ears, taken up by many voices. "The prince is wounded! The prince is wounded!" The ranks wavered and fell back irresolute, appalled by the flood of arrows. One rode up to the prince, who had plucked an arrow from out of his cheek, and was staunching the blood. He seemed to remonstrate, to try to force Henry away, but the prince shook him off and rose in his stirrups, waving his sword. His clear young voice was wafted back to the serried lines. "Onward, onward," he shouted. "Follow me." He set spur to his horse and charged forward. "St. George! St. George, for us!" he cried. Others followed his example. Montlis and Beauvallet galloped forward side by side, with Simon a little to the fore. "Follow the prince!" roared folk. "The prince and victory!" A rumble went through the lines. "The prince! The prince!" There was a sudden surge forward as the king's men charged up the hill after that heroic flying figure. Some fell into the disastrous ponds, some stumbled in the entangling pea-rows, but the bolt kept on till they had overtaken their leader, then onward still to meet the enemy's right flank. Like some heavy thunderbolts they fell upon it, and carried on, as it were, by their own impetus. They rolled it back and back, hacking and hewing before and beside them, until they had enclosed it between themselves and the king's division. Far away to the right, Simon could see folk, swept from him by the tide of men, wielding his sword like one possessed, and nearer to him was Beauvallet, cut off from the main body of the fight, and hard pressed by Percy's men, yet holding his own nobly. From his own tight-packed corner, Simon saw Beauvallet's horse go down, and Beauvallet spring clear. A man on foot caught at his own horse's rein, but before he could strike, Simon had bent forward and slashed him across his unvisored face. Then he broke free and cut himself away to where Beauvallet fought. Down he came upon the group at full gallop, and ere the rebels could turn to see what it was that fell upon them so suddenly like a bolt from the blue, he had struck. His huge sword, with all his iron strength behind it, descended on one hapless shoulder, where it joined his victim's neck, and cleaved through the sheltering armour as though it had been so much cardboard. As the man fell, soundless, Simon came to Beauvallet's side, and sprang to earth. His sword swept a circle before them, and with his free hand he thrust the horse's bridle into Beauvallet's hand. "Up, up," he cried, and sprang forward, lithe as a panther, to bring one man to earth by a single stroke so nicely measured, with so much skill and brute force behind it, that his two-edged sword split the helm on which it fell, and also its wearer's crown. He leapt back again as Beauvallet shook the reins clear of his arm. "At my back," Geoffrey gasped, and swept his sword up suddenly to intercept a deadly blow at his neck. "Fool!" Simon answered in a fury. He caught his horse as it would have bolted past him, and setting his feet squarely, forced it back upon its haunches. From the saddle holster he snatched his treasured bow, which not all folk's remonstrances had induced him to leave behind. Down he went on his knee, seeing that Beauvallet could still stand alone, and calmly fitted an arrow to the bow. Calmly, too, he took aim, and bent that mighty weapon. The arrow sang forth, but so sure was Simon of his skill, equal, folk said, to that of the best bowman in all Cheshire, that he paused not to see it hit its mark. One after another he fitted arrows to his bow, and shot them among the dwindling group about Beauvallet, until a sound behind him warned of danger. Up he sprang, cat-like, and in a flash exchanged bow for sword. And with this he did so much good work that when Beauvallet came to guard his back, he had killed a man outright, and dealt 3 others some shattering blows. "I am with thee," Beauvallet called from behind, but Simon needed no encouragement. Not for nothing had he trained his muscles throughout the years he had been at Montlis. His arms seemed tireless, his eyes unwavering. Then the body of the fight swept down upon them, and they were all but lost in its writhing masses. 3 of his assailants Simon caught at a horse's bridle. He had lost his shield and bow, but with his sword he did battle against the mounted man. Then, once more, Beauvallet was with him, himself mounted on a stray horse, and helmed again. He charged down upon Simon's foe, lance poised in readiness, and as the unknown rider would have cut Simon to earth, caught him fairly in the ribs with such force that the man, taken unawares, was toppled backwards out of his saddle, and the wind knocked out of him. "Up, lad," Beauvallet cried. "Art hurt?" Simon swung himself on the frightened animal's back, and there in the heat of battle smiled his tranquil smile, still calm and unruffled. "A scratch or two. Take no heed of me, Geoffrey of Beauvallet. That will I, Geoffrey retorted. Stay by me, nobody. Again they were enveloped in a swirling mass, and with it swept onward, their horses flank to flank, themselves hacking a path before them. Once Fulk drew near, puffing and blowing, his eyes gleaming red through his visor. Then he too was swept onward and away. To Simon the battle seemed interminable, but although his arm was weary, and he had to change his sword to his left hand, he lost not one jot of his grim enjoyment. He fought on beside Beauvallet, silent for the most part, his lips set in a hard, tight line, and his strange eyes glowing. "Canst see Hotspur?" panted Geoffrey once. "Methought I heard a shout." Even as he spoke it came again, caught up by many voices. "Hotspur has fallen! Hotspur is dead! Hurrah for St. George of England!" "He is down," said Simon, and they waver. Waver they did, and from that moment the zest seemed to go from the rebel army. The fighting became less arduous, but it was not until dusk fell that the battle ceased, and when at last the end came and his tired arm could be still, Simon sat quiet for a moment on his jaded horse, surveying the terrible field inscrutably, with little pity in his glance, but an expression of detached interest. Geoffrey of Beauvallet watched him for a moment in the half-light, and presently spoke to him. "Art a very hardy youngster," he remarked. "What think you of it all?" With a wave of his gauntleted hand, he embraced the battlefield. Simon made answer without turning his head. "It is disorderly," he said reflectively. "Methinks I will aid them to tidy it." Beauvallet realised that he was of a mind to assist in carrying away the wounded. "Not so fast, not so fast. Is that all you think?" Simon threw him a fleeting glance. "It has been a fair day," he said. "I would we might have another." Beauvallet laughed at him. "Thou cold-blooded tiger-cub, thou hast no compassion for these wounded and these dead." "One must die," Simon answered, "and I would deem this a good death. Why should I pity them?" "Yet thou wouldst go tend the wounded," Beauvallet reminded him. "So they may fight again," Simon said. "I would help them, but I would not pity them, for that is foolish." Beauvallet laughed again, wonderingly. "Good lack, art made of ice? I'll not have thee aid the wounded now. Art hurt thyself?" Simon cast a casual glance at his arm, round which, through the shattered plates, he had twisted a scarf. "Hurt? Aye. That is but a scratch, Sir Geoffrey. And thyself?" "Well enough," Beauvallet replied. "This is not my first fight. I have been with the prince here until a few months ago." "I pray God 'twill not be my last fight," Simon said. "Or mine. I had thought from thy bearing that 100 campaigns had seen thee." "Nay, but mine is fighting blood." Beauvallet eyed him curiously. "Is it? From what stock dost thou spring, I wonder? Methinks I have seen thy like before." Simon gave his short laugh. "Look in thy mirror, Geoffrey of Beauvallet." Beauvallet nodded, not surprised. "It struck me that was so a while back, when thou didst come to my rescue, for which I thank thee, brother." He held out his mailed hand, and Simon gripped it, flushing slightly. They rode slowly on down the hill. "Thy name?" Geoffrey asked presently. "Simon, of Beauvallet." Geoffrey laughed. "Oh, well done, Simon. I would thou wert not with Montless. My father would take thee to himself were I to ask it. Nay, there is a hatred in thy heart for him? Desire for vengeance, maybe?" Simon turned his head. "Why should I hate him?" "Because of thy namelessness? Thy mother? A name will I make for myself. My mother chose her own road, and if she was not happy, at least I never heard of it. She is dead. All that is nothing." "Thou art the strangest lad I ever saw," Beauvallet exclaimed. "Art squire, then, to Montless?" "Aye, one day I shall call no man save the king my master, but for the present I owe allegiance to Montless. I wonder, is he here, or did he fall?" He looked round keenly, but in the fading light could not see his lord, nor distinguish one man from Montless. If he is killed, what comes to thee? Asked Malvolay. Wilt join my train? Nay, I must lead our men back to Montlis. If Fulk is dead, then do I owe allegiance to Alan, his son? But I do not think he is dead. A rider came up with them, sitting very upright in his saddle. From under the shade of his protective helm, Simon saw a pair of shrewd, youthful eyes shining above the bandage that crossed the young man's face. Malvolay lifted his lance in salute, and the stripling reined in his horse to walk beside them. Oh, bravely done, Malvolay, and you, sir, bravely done indeed. I saw thee yonder, Geoffrey, when thou wert hard pressed, and I saw thy companion go valiantly to aid thee. Is all well with thee? I took no hurt, Highness, thanks be to Simon of Beauvallet here. I grieve to see you wounded, sir. Why, it is naught, Henry said merrily. They made a deal of pother over it, but it irks me not. He stretched his arm. Ah, but this has been a glorious day. Why, so Simon thinks, Highness, and wishes we might enjoy yet another like it. Henry bent forward to smile at Simon across Malvolay. That's the spirit I love, I said. Whose man are you, Simon of Beauvallet? I serve Montlis, Highness, Simon answered. Montlis? I saw him fall a while since. They bore him away, but I do not think he is dead. He would be hard to kill, sir, Simon said. I must go seek him, with your permission. Henry nodded pleasantly. Aye, do not wait on my coming. I would speak with Geoffrey, but I shall not forget you, or your valour this day. Simon bowed. Your Highness is very kind, sir. Malvolay held out his hand yet again. We shall meet again, Simon. Simon gripped his outstretched hand. As foes, Malvolay, once I am at Montlis again. Nay, nay, Geoffrey answered. I shall see thee in Shrewsbury. Remember, I am in thy debt. Simon smiled and released his hand. As I will bear no man gratitude, so let no man be grateful unto me, Malvolay. Mayhap we shall fight again one day, side by side. Who knows? Then it is farewell for the present, Simon. Aye, Geoffrey, but one day we shall meet again as equals. See thou forgettest me not, Malvolay called after him, and watched him ride away towards the rear guard, where they were tending the wounded. This is a passing strange man, Geoffrey, the young prince remarked. Who is he? He's very like thee, save that he is fair, where thou art dark. He calls himself Beauvallet, sir, and is my half-brother. I met him for the first time on this campaign. He saved my life a while back, as your Highness saw. Henry nodded. Aye, 'twas bravely done. Shall I have my father knight him? Ah, if your Highness would. Indeed, he deserves it on this day's work alone. Henry looked after the now distant figure thoughtfully. There is that in him that pleases, he said, but he is very cold. Perhaps he will be a great man one day. I would fain call him friend, methinks. He did not find his lord anywhere on the battlefield, but he was in no way perturbed. Back he rode to Shrewsbury, to Fulk's lodgings, and there he found Montlis, stretched upon a bed, and swearing mightily, while a leech dressed the wound in his shoulder. Simon clanked in, a grim figure in dusty, blood-stained armour, that in one or two places had been shattered by some lusty blows. The face that looked out from under the peak of his helm was tired and drawn, but his green-blue eyes were as calm as ever, as if he had not seen more horrors today than in all his young life. At sight of him, a look of relief swept over Fulk's countenance. Ah, God be thanked, he rumbled. I might have known thou'st be hard to kill. As I knew of thee, Simon said. He beckoned to my lord's page. Unlance me, Francis. Montlis nodded. Aye, aye, unlace him, boy. Art whole, Simon? Save for a scratch, Simon answered. Gently, Francis, with mine arm. How deep goes your wound, my lord? Fulk growled. A nothing, a nothing. Hey, thou clumsy wretch, have a care, he roared as the leech handled him. I saw thee by Malvolay, Simon. What madness seized thee? None, said Simon briefly. With his ungauntleted hand, he unstrapped his helm and cast it on the table. "When left you the field, sir?" "I fell," Fulk replied angrily, "and they bore me away. A million curses be upon them. I left it not of mine own will." "They were wavering. What came of it?" "They are in full flight," Simon said. Free of his armour, he stretched himself and heaved a sigh of relief. "God's my life, I am weary. Give me leave, sir, I would sleep." "Wait," Fulk ordered. "Thine arm." Simon untwisted the bloody scarf, revealing a great gash that at once began to bleed again. Fulk pushed the leech away from him. "Go tend my squire, good surgeon. I shall do very well." He waited in silence while the leech washed and bandaged Simon's wound. Then he nodded. "Go thou, Simon, and rest. I will see thee anon." Simon went out to his own tiny room. There he flung himself down upon his hard bed and slept almost at once. He did not wake until past 8 on the following day, and then he made all haste to dress himself and wait upon his lord. He found Fulk breakfasting, despite the late hour, his shoulder neatly bandaged, and himself seemingly not very much the worse for wear. He grunted when he saw Simon and waved him to a seat at his own table. Simon, unimpressed by the honour, sat down and disposed of a tankard of ale. He then drew a platter towards him and proceeded to make a hearty meal. Neither he nor Fulk spoke until they had satisfied their hunger. At length my lord pushed back his chair, and wiping his fingers on the coarse cloth, looked across to his squire. "Thomas of Worcester and the Scottish Earl were taken," he remarked. Simon nodded, and there the conversation ended. Fulk went out presently, accompanied by his page, and Simon spent the morning polishing his sword and armour. Fulk did not return for dinner, which he took at court, but soon after 3 in the afternoon he rolled in. "Hark ye, Simon," he puffed, "the king goes to make some dozen knights." He looked narrowly at Simon as he spoke, but Simon displayed no interest. He was cleaning my lord's shield, and his whole attention seemed centred upon it. "With my good will he will make thee knight," Fulk said. Simon's busy hands drew still. He shot an upward glance at Montless. "Ye jest, my lord." "Nay, the prince remarked thy courage on the field, and have recommended thee for knighthood." For a minute Simon sat silent, staring before him. He drew a deep breath of wonderment, and looked again at Montless. "And thy good will, sir?" "Well, well," said Fulk, "I should have recommended thee myself. Shalt have thy knighthood, lad, and thou'lt stay yet a while with me." "As your squire, my lord?" he asked. Fulk laid a clumsy hand on his shoulder. "As my son, if thou wilt, Simon. Art too young to flare forth alone. When Alan is older shalt go forth with him. Till then, stay thou with me, and grow yet taller." Simon pondered it for a time. "But what will you have me do, lord? It seems that I am no longer necessary to you, and I'll not stay idle at Montless." "Shalt command my men in Vincent's room, who fell yesterday. God rest his soul. I will pay thee a good wage, so thou mayst have the money against thy later needs." Simon pondered again, his eyes on the distant hills. He brought them back presently to rest on his lord, and smiled. "It is a fair offer," he said. "Thy hand on it," Fulk answered promptly. He held out his great paw. Simon gripped it until the veins along the back of his hand stood out blue and thick. So he accepted Fulk as his liege lord. The ceremony of knighting took place on the following day. Besides Simon were 12 other men, so that he made the 13th, a happening that Fulk regarded as inauspicious, until Simon told him that 13 was a number that brought him good luck. Fulk attended him to court, and kept an anxious yet proud eye upon him during the rite. Simon was the last to kneel before the king, and as he bent the knee he saw Beauvallet standing amongst a group behind the prince. Geoffrey smiled at him and made a little saluting movement with his hand. At the king's last words to him, "Rise, Sir Simon of Beauvallet," Simon came to his feet. The rest of the ceremony passed in a kind of haze. When it was over, he found that Geoffrey was at his side with the prince. Simon bowed. "I have heard yet more of your doings, Sir Simon," Henry said, twinkling. "Paul of Lenoir tells a tale of your lynx eyes." "That was nothing, lord," Simon answered. "Mine eyes are sharp, and I can see in the darkness." He looked at Geoffrey for a moment. "So, thou hast paid thy debt to me, Malvolé?" "No, no," Malvolé cried. "This is none of my making, though glad I am to see you knighted. Tell him, sir, that 'tis your highness's own contriving." "Aye, that is so," nodded Henry. Geoffrey had naught to say in the matter. "And so the debt remains unpaid," Malvolé said. "Now at least, Simon, thou'lt quit Montless." "Nay," Simon answered. "I remain with him yet another year or two." At this point the prince stepped aside to speak with one who passed. Geoffrey spoke lower, jerking his head towards the young Henry. "Why dost thou not take service under him? He is a good master." "One day I will," Simon answered. "For the nonce there are reasons why I should stay at Montless, and folk has my word." "Then it is useless for me to say more," Geoffrey shrugged. "It irks me to see thee with our lifelong foe." Then, as folk came towards them, he clasped Simon's hand for a moment. "I could love thee, Simon. Forget it not." "What did that fellow want with thee?" grumbled folk, when Malvolé was out of earshot. "Why must thou make a friend of mine enemy?" "I make friends where I will," Simon said curtly. "Nay, that thou shalt not. Mine enemy is thine. I'll have thee know." Simon looked at him thoughtfully. "Not so. Yet this do I owe to you, that I will not call Malvolé friend while I remain under your roof." They left Shrewsbury with the king 2 days later, and went south with him until they had to branch off to reach Cambridge. Folk's losses had been few, and in place of Vincent was Simon, who proved himself to be so thoroughly equal to this task that folk remembered that Vincent's death was more of a blessing than a curse. And so they arrived at Montless early in August, after an absence of nearly a month. They rode up to the castle slope to find Alan awaiting them, with my lady at his side, and her 2 daughters behind her. Folk dropped heavily from the saddle, and enfolded his frail wife in his elephantine embrace. The 2 girls hung back shyly, but he kissed them both heartily, and his son. "Well, well, well," he puffed, "so here you see me, safe and sound, sweetling, with naught to show for my fighting save a scratch upon my shoulder." "For which I thank God with all my heart," said my lady devoutly. "I have been in agony of dread, my dear lord, for thy sake." "A pack of rebels cannot slay Montless," he answered. "Simon is safe, as thou seest, but Vincent is gone." "Ah, poor Vincent," she cried, but held out her hand to Simon. "I rejoice to see thee again, Simon of Beauvallet. Ye took no harm?" Simon knelt to kiss her hand. "None, lady, that is worth the telling. I trust I do see you well?" She smiled. "Well enough, now that I have my lord again." Folk put his hand on her shoulder. "There is news for thee, Eleanor. Our Simon is my squire no longer." She was puzzled and looked inquiringly at Simon, who had risen to his feet. It was Alan whose quick instinct divined the truth. He ran forward and caught Simon's hand. "Hast been knighted, Simon? Simon, it's true indeed." "Aye, knighted he is," said folk, "and by the king's own hand, for his exceedingly great valour on the field. I present thee Sir Simon of Beauvallet, my lady." Then the countess, out of the sweetness of her nature, made Simon mightily uncomfortable. Overcoming her slight timidity of him, she stepped forward and laid her hands upon his. Simon, flushingly, bent and received a kiss upon his rugged brow. Folk laughed, clapping his hands to his sides. "Now art thou honoured indeed, lad. My lady, is there refreshment within? I could drain a well, and Simon too, I'll swear." "'Tis laid out against your coming, my lord," she answered. "Come within, and Simon also." Simon stepped back. "I give you thanks, my lady, But I must first see to my men." "Aye, aye, there speaks the general," chuckled Fulk, and watched him walk away towards the waiting column of men. From that day onwards, Simon ranked with Alan in my lord's household. He sat at table with the family, far above the salt, and he was given a squire of his own and a page. A fair chamber was allotted to him, and in addition to all this he received a round sum each month as wage for his services. Still he felt no pang of gratitude, for if in these things his life was made easier and more luxurious, he repaid it amply by the work he did. In a surprisingly short space of time, the management of the estate devolved itself on his broad shoulders. My lord was no longer young, and the late campaign had taxed his strength, even though he would not admit it. He lost some of his untiring energy, and he was content to put the reins of government into Simon's hands, since his son would have none of them. So life drifted onwards for a time, placidly enough, with but one incident to disturb its even tenor, and this was the coming of Beauvallet to Montlis. He rode up to the castle late one afternoon in September, attended by his page. One of Montlis's varlets, astonished at his advent, was sent to advise my lord of this. Fulk was with his lady, and when he heard the news, he screwed up his eyes and frowned. "Simon," he said succinctly, "plague be on him." "But Beauvallet in our domain," cried my lady. "Curse his impudence," growled Fulk, and went out with his rolling gait to receive this unwelcome guest. Beauvallet was standing before the fireplace, his hands behind him, and one spurred foot tapping the ground. He did not move a step to meet Fulk, but merely inclined his head haughtily. Midway across the hall, Fulk paused. "My lord," he rumbled, "I regret the necessity which compels me to intrude on your land, my lord of Montlis," said Beauvallet icily. "I desire to see my son, Sir Simon of Beauvallet." "To what purpose?" A red gleam appeared at the back of Fulk's eyes, sure sign of danger. "Your pardon." Beauvallet gazed back at him unflinchingly. "That is mine affair." "Nay, it is mine, my lord. Simon of Beauvallet is in my service." A little pulse started to throb on Beauvallet's temple. Fulk regarded it, pleased. "That is an error which I will rectify," Beauvallet said. Under the calm of his voice, anger sounded. "Will you so, my lord? And what if Simon wills otherwise?" "Sir Simon is my son, sir. Good lack. Have ye but just discovered it?" Fulk jeered. Beauvallet bit his lip. "Just, Lord Fulk. And he has squired me these 3 years," Fulk said, and watched the barb go home. "That would not have been had I known, my lord." Fulk gave a great laugh. "Well, I suppose ye knew of the existence of a child, Lord Geoffrey. Methinks your efforts at paternal authority are a thought belated." Beauvallet was silent for a moment, curbing his anger. Presently he looked up again. "My lord, will ye have the goodness to summon my son?" "To what avail?" Fulk asked politely. 3 years since he came to me in his own free will, in preference to you. I do not think he is like to change." Again Beauvallet battled with himself, but his voice trembled a little with passion when he spoke. "Nevertheless, my lord, I demand to have speech with him." "Demand, demand! And by what right do ye demand in my domain, my lord? I have told you, Simon is my son." "Simon is my servant," Fulk retorted quickly. He saw Beauvallet's jaw clench. "This bandying of words is useless," Beauvallet said. "We but waste time." "Why, so I think," bowed Montlis. "I will e'en summon your horse." Beauvallet tapped the table between them with his riding whip. He leaned forward, glaring at Fulk. "Lord Fulk, I do not stir from this spot until I have seen Simon." Then, ere Fulk could reply in kind, a deep, cold voice spoke from the doorway. "Who is it that desires speech with Simon of Beauvallet?" it said. Beauvallet swung round. Just within the hall stood Simon, a very giant of a man, regarding him fixedly from under lowering brows. For a moment no one spoke. Then Beauvallet strode forward. "So, thou art my son," he said slowly. "Am I?" Simon answered. "I have forgotten." with their eyes they measured one another. Beauvallet spoke quietly. "I come to offer thee the shelter of my roof, Simon." "I need it not, my lord." "A place at my table," Beauvallet insisted. "Next thy brother, a place at my side as my acknowledged son." Simon's lip curled, sneering. "Oh, brave, my lord. Thy bastard son, forsooth!" Beauvallet flushed. "I will make thee great in the land, aye, and I will give thee fair estates." "I need them not, my lord." Again there was a silence. "Ye defy me, Simon. Ye have hate for me in your heart. Nay? Then return with me to Beauvallet, and bear thine own name. No name is mine save the one I have chosen. An insult to me, that name. Is it so, my lord?" He looked upward at Beauvallet without any feeling in his glance. Beauvallet stretched out his hand. "Simon, to what avail? This coldness of thine. Am I not thy father?" "So I am told," Simon replied. "Have I no right to thee? Has Montless my right?" "No man has a right to me, save it be the king. The law gives thee none. I am what I am. Thou shalt be something more than what thou art." "I doubt it not. Through my contriving." "Simon," Beauvallet cried, "is there no blood tie betwixt us?" "It has never been thy pleasure to acknowledge it," Simon answered coldly. "I knew not of thine existence." Simon looked him over. "Thou didst know that a child would be born to thee by Jehan, my mother. Thou didst make no effort to provide for it, nor to discover even whether it were a boy or girl." Beauvallet's hands dropped to his sides. "It is resentment, then, that makes thee churlish now?" "I feel none." "Then what moves thee to this coldness, Simon?" Simon waited for a moment before replying. "If I do seem cold to thee, my lord, it is not from hatred or soreness of spirit. Thou art a stranger to me. How should I bear thee affection, who have never shown me any?" Beauvallet winced. "All this I will make right betwixt us, my son. Let the past be buried, for indeed there is love for thee in me now. Canst not forget the harm I have done thee by my indifference. Thou hast worked no harm on me. The past is naught, as shall be the present." "Simon, Simon, thou art unjust and cruel. Hadst thou come to me 3 years ago, I would have taken thee to my bosom." The green-blue eyes narrowed. "In me, my lord, is Beauvallet blood. A Beauvallet asks no favours. Hadst thou come to me 3 years ago, then indeed things might have been different. It was not then convenient to thee, or mayhap thou hast forgotten that a base-born child of thine was living. In those days I did fend for myself, because it was not thy pleasure to seek me out. Now, when my need of help is dead, it has become thy pleasure. It is not mine." Beauvallet heard him out in silence. He answered very low. "Mayhap I do deserve thy scorn and thy hatred. But is thy hatred so great that it denies me the means to make amends? I have told thee, my lord, that I feel no hatred for thee. I had rather that than thine indifference. If I cause thee pain, I do crave thy pardon. What else but indifference can I feel for one with whom I have never exchanged a word until today?" Beauvallet went nearer to him. "Come with me now, Simon, and I will teach thee to care for me. Come away from the land of Montless. Thou, my son, canst not remain here." "Aye, that is what irks thee," Simon answered. "I serve thine enemy, Montless. Were I 100 leagues from here, thou hadst not come to me today, or ever. Thy pride is hurt." "I swear it is not so." Simon jerked his shoulder. "No matter. Whate'er thy motive, mine answer remains the same. I owe my lord folk allegiance, and I will break my word for no man." Then there fell another long silence. Beauvallet made a hopeless gesture with his hands. He spoke dully. "No argument will prevail thee?" "None." "Then we must part foes?" "I bear no malice to thee or thine, my lord, and between thy son and me is friendship. But whiles I serve Montless, his enemies are mine. Tell Geoffrey he was ill-advised to send thee to me, but tell him also that one day he and I will meet again, and there shall be naught of enmity betwixt us." "And betwixt thou and me," Beauvallet cried eagerly. "Again naught, neither love nor hatred. The past is dead, and with it our kinship, but if ever we two shall meet again, it will not be as false." "Thou art generous," Beauvallet said slowly. "Think well before ye say me nay. Much can I do for thee, and very powerful can I make thee. Do these things count for naught? My lord, it is my set purpose that I will take no honour, no power, no wealth, no title, that I have not earned by my own endeavour. I like not thine easy road, but all these things will I acquire, either by toil, by skill, or by valour. I do thank thee for thine offer, but mine answer is nay." "Aye, thou art a man," Beauvallet sighed, "and my blood runs hot in thee. This is farewell, but before I go, wilt thou not lay thy hand in mine, and tell me that my past neglect of thee is indeed forgiven?" He held out his hand, looking almost wistfully at his son. Simon put his into it deliberately, and for a moment their fingers gripped. "If wrong has been done to me, I do readily forgive it, for thy neglect has made me what I am, and no cosseted stripling of the court." Beauvallet still held his hand firmly. "Promise me one thing, Simon. If ever thou shouldst have need of me, if ever thou shouldst wish to undo this day's work, thou wilt put thy pride aside and come to me, for that will be thy condescension, not mine." Simon frowned. "If ever I have need of thee, I can stand alone. If ever I should wish it to unsay my nay, that will be never. I will promise, my lord." Beauvallet almost crushed his hand, then quickly he released it, and looked at Simon with a queer, twisted smile. "Thou son after mine own heart," he said softly, and strode forth with never a word to Folk, and never a backwards glance. There was silence for a long minute when he had gone. Folk was looking at Simon with wonderment in his eyes. "It is to please thyself or me that thou hast said Beauvallet nay?" he asked. "Both, maybe," Simon answered briefly, and swung out of the door.